Hello APUSH students, today we're going to cover Unit 4, Part 1. We're looking at 1800 to 1848, 10% of the exam. You guys know this background picture is one of my favorites. We're looking at Manifest Destiny in this unit, and expansion is a big part of it. Now, where are we starting with this thing? We're starting over here in 1800 when Jefferson was elected. We'll go over James Madison's presidency. We'll take a look at James Monroe. We'll look at the Monroe Doctrine. We'll look at the War of 1812, Missouri Compromise. So again, that expansion aspect. We'll get into Jackson, the Indian Removal Act, Jackson vetoing laws. We'll cover all that. The Whig Party, which is very important as well. And we're going to end over here with the end of the Mexican-American War, the Gold Rush, all that stuff. So let's start off with periodization. Start date 1800 is where we're beginning off with this unit, and that's the Jefferson and Adams election. That's an important election because it's our first two-party system. So we have these federalists, these guys who want a big federal government. They're supported by the North, rich people like these guys, versus Thomas Jefferson, who's part of the new Democratic Republican Party. He wants strong state governments instead of federal, agriculture instead of manufacturing, right? They like, or the South rather, likes the Democratic Republicans. This is also important because it's the first time we have a peaceful transfer of power between two different parties. So this could have gone wrong. Adams could have said, I'm not going to step down, and we're going to maintain a federalist control of the government, but he didn't. He stepped down, and we have Thomas Jefferson moving in peacefully. And like I said, this is the start of the first two-party system. We'll get to the second two-party system later in this video. Now, it ends in 1848. That is the end of the Mexican-American War. And if we look at a map of the U.S., you can see by the end of this unit, America is looking a lot like it does today. So that's why they end it at that time, is because America has really expanded its borders all the way to the Pacific to take most of North America. Let's go over what's going on politically as far as political parties go during this period. We start off obviously with Jefferson, that Democratic Republican. Under his tenure we have the case Marbury versus Madison, which is very important because it establishes judicial review, meaning that the Supreme Court can now decide what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. So that is very important. After Jefferson, we get James Madison, another Democratic Republican. He's in office for quite some time. After that, we get James Monroe, another Democratic Republican. You might be seeing a pattern here. Under his presidency, we have the era of good feelings after the War of 1812, which we'll look at a little bit later, but just know that the era of good feelings is we're feeling very united as a country. We just beat a major European power. We're nationalistic. We're feeling good about being Americans. And there's only kind of one dominating political party during this time. So Americans are kind of getting along, sort of. It's a little misleading, as we'll see with this election here. Under Monroe, we also get the Missouri Compromise of 1820. That is going to omit Missouri over here as a slave state. Oh, sorry, up here as a slave state, and Maine will be admitted as a free state. And we'll have the 36 parallel, meaning this line, whenever we expand, we'll have free states above that line and slave states below it. Now, of course, that is a band-aid to put on the real problem of slavery. It doesn't actually solve anything, but it's worth a shot, okay? Now, JQA is after Monroe, John Quincy Adams. his election kind of pokes a hole in this era of good feelings, right? We have what's called the corrupt bargain, or the election of 1824. You can see here the popular vote turnout for this thing. We have Jackson winning with a 43%. Even in the electoral vote, we have a 38% for Jackson, which is more than anyone else got, but we don't have a majority, or over 50% for the electoral vote. So what they do is they allow the House to choose who's going to be president, and they choose Adams, and you might be able to tell that 31% of Americans are very excited, and the rest are pissed, okay? So this is a very important election to remember. Now, JQA is also going to pass the Tariff of Abominations, which will become important with the nullification crisis. We'll get to that in a second, but just know he is going to pass a tariff that doesn't allow, or it does allow, but it's going to put a tariff on finished goods, manufactured goods, like farming equipment and stuff like that. That's bad for the South because they need to buy that farming equipment to produce their tobacco and their rice and things like that. It's good for the North because the North makes those products, okay? So he passes this Tariff of Abominations, very important. Now, Andrew Jackson, who is a Democrat. You'll notice he's no longer a Democratic Republican. We see our next two-party system, our second two-party system, arise here between the Democrats and the Whigs. Okay? So Jackson is a Democrat. He's known for the spoils system, where he is not going to appoint his cabinet based on merit. Instead, he's going to give positions to his buddies or people who agree with him, which adds to corruption. We also get the nullification crisis, where essentially our tariffs of abominations are going to be ignored by South Carolina, and Jackson is going to say, that's not going to fly with me, bud, and he is going to pass the Force Bill, which says that if the southern states resist the federal government can use force to force them to pay taxes. That's going to have some pretty big implications for the Civil War. Now, he is part of the New Democrat Party, which oddly enough is very supported by the South. I know I just said he screwed over the South, but Jackson is a weird guy like that. But the South does like him until this nullification crisis. We also get the rise of the Whig Party. Just know, all the Whigs want to do is end the Democrats being in office, because we have these Democratic Republicans and then we have Democrats, and they're just getting tired of this kind of one party running the show. So that is the Whigs. Now, Martin Van Buren, Jackson's vice president, will take over after Jackson is done. His whole presidency is plagued by the Panic of 1837, so not much there politically. But after him, we get William Henry Harrison, the first Whig to get into office. Poor guy dies a month into his presidency, which is very sad. Then we get John Tyler, his vice president. And finally, we get James Polk. Again, we're back to Democrats, and he is really the manifest destiny president, which we'll get to with expansion. Foreign policy and wars in this unit are huge. First off, Jefferson is going to go through the First Barbary War, which is some Barbary pirates in North Africa are going to harass and demand tribute to not sink American vessels. Jefferson reluctantly is going to spend a lot of money on the Navy, and he'll expand the American Navy to put an end to these Barbary pirates robbing our ships. Next, we have the Napoleonic Wars, which are obviously in Europe, not America, but the U.S. is going to remain neutral through the whole thing, or at least try to remain neutral. We do have some impressment happening, which is in British ships will capture American vessels, and they will kidnap American sailors and impress them into the British Navy, or force them to fight for the British Navy, which you can imagine angers Americans quite a bit. It angers them so much that war breaks out in 1812 between the U.S. and Britain. Now, just a little note, Native Americans are going to side with the British in the War of 1812, and if you remember from class, good old Andrew Jackson is going to be the guy who really heads the campaign against the natives in the War of 1812, so when he becomes president, he already has anti-native sentiment. Now, other important things, War of 1812, we have the burning of Washington, D.C., okay? We get British troops all the way into our capital, and they burn down a good part of the city, which really hurts American morale, but they are going to turn around and win the war, the U.S. will. And it's going to lead to a lot of nationalism. Again, that era of good feelings is going to spawn out of the War of 1812. It ends with the Treaty of Ghent, where they sign peace between U.S. and Britain. Now, you should know the Adams and Onis Treaty of 1819 as well. Florida is going to be given to the U.S. From Spain. They're going to allow us to take Florida, which sometimes you wish they might just take it back, but we do get Florida in 1819. We also get the Monroe Doctrine passed, a foreign policy coming down from Monroe, the president. He is going to say that no Europeans are going to be allowed to cross into the Western Hemisphere. This is basically our territory. Nobody can come in here, especially Europeans, and muddle with South America or North America. We get the Alamo, okay, which is during the Texas Revolution for independence from Mexico. What happens here is Mexican troops are going to slaughter a ton of Texas troops at the Alamo, and it's going to build a lot of anti-Mexican sentiment in America at the time. And that anti-Mexican sentiment is going to lead, or at least add to, the Mexican-American War, okay? If you remember, we have American troops in the disputed territory. They get attacked by Mexican troops, and Polk is going to use that as kind of an excuse to go to war with Mexico to get some land. Okay? It's going to end with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the Mexican secession, where they sell us, in air quotes, a bunch of land. We'll look at that under expansion. Now, what about economy in Unit 4? We have the Embargo Act early on in 1807. There's a bunch of these Embargo Acts, but it's going to block trade with Britain and France. So again, the Napoleonic Wars are raging. America is going to try to be neutral, and you can see that from this Embargo Act, where they're going to block trade with both of these warring nations of Britain and France to not take sides. We also have the Second Bank of the United States established. Again, this bank is designed to collect taxes and pay off American loans and try to kind of balance out the economy. Now, Jackson is going to run for president under the idea that he is going to slay the beast of the Second Bank, okay? He says it's this corrupt, many-headed monster, right, that's being controlled by Europeans in a big government, and he wants to destroy this corrupt system, and it's very popular with Americans, and Jackson does get elected based on that idea. He will succeed. Eventually, the Second Bank is going to have to repass its funding bill, and Jackson is going to veto that, and the Second Bank will die in 1836. Look at the date of that panic right there. Now, we also have the American system, which is supported by Henry Clay and the Whigs. And this American system, the idea is to have high tariffs or high taxes on goods coming into the United States. Now that does two things. Number one, it raises money for the U.S. government, obviously. And number two, when Americans are producing goods, they can get better prices and they'll sell more because these British or European goods have high taxes on them, okay? So it supports American business and it gives the government more money. Now, what are they going to do with this money? If you look in the background here, this may give you a hint. They want to build infrastructure. They want to build railroads, telegraph lines, things like that. They want America to expand and become modern. An example of this is the Tariff of 1816. So if you need to know an example for the test, American System Tariff of 1816, which again is just taxes on goods coming into the U.S. We also have the Lowell system, and this is a new system of production in the United States where women are going to work in factories in textiles, and it's going to be very popular in both Britain and America to get women into factories and working because they work for less, obviously. We also have the Panic of 1837, and that is going to kind of be caused by the Second Bank of the U.S. getting dissolved, okay? If the bank was still there, it might have been able to balance out that panic, but unfortunately it's not, and it is one of the biggest recessions in American history, that Panic of 1837. Lastly, we have expansion. There's huge expansion in this time period. Obviously, like I said, we're going to start to see the modern American borders we have today, and that starts with the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Now, Thomas Jefferson is president at the time, and he's going to buy this huge chunk of land from Napoleon over in France. And Napoleon needs that, he needs to sell this land so that he can finance his wars that are raging in Europe. There is a problem with this, though. The Constitution does not allow Jefferson to buy land for the United States. And Jefferson is a Democratic Republican. He likes small federal government. So, ironically, he is going to be kind of going against his own party platform by buying this land as the President of the United States, which there's a lot of good political cartoons of that. Look those up. We also have the Texas annexation, where Texas gains independence and then becomes part of America in 1845. And then finally, the Mexican-American War. All this land over here is gained during the Mexican-American War, and like we said, it starts with some American troops going in this disputed territory. They get attacked. Polk declares war, and then they buy, again in quotes, buy land from the Mexicans, all this land up here for very, very cheap. They really force them to sell it. And obviously, just a few days actually after the end of the Mexican-American War, we'll find gold out here in California at Sutter's Mill, and we'll have the gold rush, and California will become a state very quickly because all those people move out west. Now, that's the end of part 1. We'll continue on with part 2 in the next video. Stay safe, guys. Eat your vegetables and listen to your parents.